Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. Working mothers of young children are leaving their jobs at the fastest pace we've seen since the pandemic. This is according to new analysis from Misty Heggeness. She's an economist and associate professor at the University of Kansas, and she's here to talk about this trend, what she's found, and what it means for the broader economy. Misty, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you used to work for the Census Bureau, so you looked at the microdata behind jobs data effectively and are finding a concerning trend about working mothers. Can you tell us top line what you found?
Yeah, so in the first half of 2025, working mothers, or I'll just say mothers in general, ages 25 to 44, who had children under the age of 5, experienced a 3 percentage point decline in labor force participation.
A 3% decline. How does that compare to other recent periods of U.S. history?
So what I think that means is, we've had an opportunity to learn about ways in which we can engage with caregivers and mothers of small children in a way that allows them to be productive in the labor force. And, that presents us with a potential ability to understand what we might want to do or policies we might want to implement to get them back into the labor force.
And we'll get to what it would take to reverse this trend, but I want to keep digging into this decline because what your data seems to suggest is we've effectively erased all the gains that we saw during the pandemic. And you also look at different groups within the broader group of women with younger children. Is there one demographic group versus another that is leaving the labor market at a faster rate than the others?
Yeah, so I did also look at this by marital status, and mothers who are not married essentially dropped at almost double the rate. So I think it was around 7 or 7.5 percentage point drop in the first half of 2025 for mothers who are not married.
And what does that mean for our economy? What do you think it means?
Well, when I think of the economy and what it might mean for our economy, I generally start thinking about households. That's where the majority of my research lies in thinking about labor supply and how households engage with the labor market. And I think it is really concerning if we're seeing big and rapid shifts in labor force participation of some of our caregivers who are in some sense potentially the most vulnerable because they have less access to resources, less access to informal support systems that they can rely on. And if those mothers are not able to actively engage in paid labor, we should all be concerned about what's going on and what's going on with the well-being of their families, and also how that then moves into how we might think about their participation in the economy generally.
Do we know if their leaving the workforce is voluntary versus involuntary, which is to say, are they choosing to leave their jobs, or are they part of some of the layoffs we've seen at the federal level and in the private sector as well this year?
Yeah, so we don't know for sure. There are a couple of ways in which we could think about this situation and what might be happening. It is true that, the federal government has enacted a iteration of RIFs, or reduction in force mechanisms that have really reduced the government workforce, and caregivers and women generally disproportionately take up jobs that tend to be more flexible. Government jobs tend to be more flexible, and so there's generally more women and more caregivers in government jobs. So that could be having an influence here. There's also, with this return to office policies that started in January and have started with the federal government and also then transitioned into some of the bigger employers, return to office tends to be relatively unfriendly to people who have large amounts of informal family care in their lives. And so some women could be stepping back from the workforce either because they've been asked to return to office and they can't figure out how they're going to be able to do that and add the time for the commute into their day along with all their caregiving responsibilities, or maybe they haven't yet asked to return to office, but they've been told that it's going to happen. And in anticipation of that fact, they might be choosing to leave the labor force.
You have also written about the cultural headwinds facing women and women of young children. Could you talk about what we're seeing culturally that could be contributing to this decline in their labor force participation?
Yeah, there's a lot going on culturally just in terms of the shifting dynamics, kind of at the top, if you will, or the way in which policymakers today are thinking about families and thinking about women in work, and that could also be influencing the level of support that women and caregivers feel within businesses, within the labor market, and that could also be having an effect.
Now, you've looked at the data over the last few years, and it felt like there was a bit of an increase in women's employment and mothers' employment, and then it took a decline. When did this decline begin, and are you able to forecast how long it could continue?
Yeah, so the decline that I was looking at in the data, really, you started to observe it in February of 2025. We started the year at a really high note. So mothers' labor force participation was very high in January and has since been on the decline up through June. It did make a slight recovery in July. So if you were to compare January to July, it's a 2 percentage point decrease over that time period, so the 3% that we see from January to June. Keep in mind that mothers' labor force participation often is volatile and sensitive to schooling and when their children are in school. And lots of mothers of young children are teachers and have other types of jobs that are pegged with the educational industry. I think it's a good sign that it went up between June and July. I think that this is probably an initial shock. And the one thing that I know about caregivers and women in general is that we are very persistent and very resilient. And so I would anticipate that there will be some sort of rebound as women and caregivers adjust to the new norms in society about the expectations that employers and the federal government and politicians have on how caregivers should engage in work. But I don't foresee it ever returning to the levels that we had right after the pandemic up through the end of 2024, because I think in order for that, we have to have more realistic assumptions and more realistic expectations on how we're going to engage with workers in order to really maximize off of their productivity given the situation of their lives.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the Forbes Future of Work Summit that we had in 2023, and it felt like among the executives gathered, there was broad agreement that remote work is good for worker productivity, and it's a rather feminist policy that allows folks who have caregiving duties, either for young children or an aging or sick family member, to still participate in the workforce. Yeah. And it's frustrating to see some of these declines, frankly. And you've written about what this could mean over the long term. You've said that when women step out of the workforce, it's a setback that can echo for decades. Can you talk about why you say that and how exactly it's a setback?
Yeah, so it's a setback. I mean, I'll start by saying that the way that I view our economy is really, it's a perspective of my own as a caregiver. I really believe and view the economy as being something that was set up, not designed for women and caregivers. It was really designed for men who have something that I call care privilege, in that, you're able-bodied adult and you have somebody else who is cooking your meals for you, ironing your clothes, etc. So just the labor market in general in our economy really has struggles with being adaptable for the lives of women. And I think what happens is when we have employers who want to go back to the old norm, who want to have these very generic across the board policies around return to work, they're really going to, there's a couple of things that happen, I think, in my head. First, it's going to reduce productivity just generally, because if you're a manager of a group or an executive of a business, really what you want to do is tap into and harness the productivity of your employees. And you are going to be the most successful when you figure out how to do that in the most efficient way. And writ large, telling everybody that they have to return to office and that you care more about, a butt in a seat than you care about whether or not they're able to really tap into and use their talent to enhance the productivity of your business. You're deflating energy, you're deflating innovation, and return to office works for some subgroups, but it doesn't work for all. So I really think that right now we're in a moment of opportunity where managers and executives who are willing to do the work to design a work environment that has options for multiple different groups of employees based on these employees' life situation. Those are the businesses that are going to thrive today and into tomorrow. Those are the businesses that are going to really be able to harness and maximize the productivity of their employees and be the most successful and cutting edge. So while it is frustrating that we are trying, that there's such a cultural push towards a return to the way that it used to be, I do think that the businesses who are interested in really listening to their employees do have even more of an opportunity today to really tap into and harness some really excellent talent, especially talent from folks who are leaving these other businesses because of the return to office.
That's a good point. It's a moment of opportunity, but I'm wondering, Misty, is it also a canary in the coal mine for the broader economy? This is a pretty significant decline. And we did see jobless claims last week, and this is for all Americans, not just women, rose by the most we've seen in months. And also the number of people seeking unemployment relief has climbed to its highest level in 4 years. So taken all together, what does that tell you about the American economy in late August 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we should be worried. One of the effects that I think we're going to see continue to happen is, once the government started kind of slashing employees, it put a lot of people on administrative paid leave. And a lot of that administrative paid leave process is drying up. And, in July, some of it ended. We're going to see more of it end in September. And those folks are going to start looking for work, and they are going to start showing up in the unemployment rolls. So I do expect unemployment, to really not be in a good space or not, reduce going forward, because we're going to start seeing those people trickle in. And then I very much think that parents of young children, or women of young children, I think that looking at Black mothers and Black women's labor force participation in particular, all of those are very much canary and coal mine scenarios for tipping us off onto what's probably in the future in line for us in terms of where the labor market is going.
That's a sobering statement given the data and the trends that you are producing right now. But I am wondering, we've talked about remote work. Is there anything else, or flexible work rather? Hybrid situations could certainly help some folks in caregiving situations. But is there anything aside from remote, flexible, hybrid work that could help reverse the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. One area that I think is really undertapped is this idea of networking and mentoring and feeling like you're a part of a group. And so I think what happens, to the extent that women are pulling back from the labor market because they're seeing these cultural shifts in how businesses want to treat employees, what expectations businesses have on employees. If you're somebody that that new expectation doesn't really fit easily for you in your space, it is easy to get demoralized. It is easy to say, well, that's not going to work for me, so I have no other choice but to go to leave. And I think the more and more that we talk to each other and we realize that there's a group of us who are in the same boat, there's a lot of power in that, in our ability to advocate as a group, to kind of push back on some of these more dominant cultural trends that we're seeing and the expectations that business owners have on us.
I like that note of optimism. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything I've missed or anything else the Forbes audience should know about your analysis of labor market data right now in August 2025?
So if anything, I think that what we've learned since the pandemic and the opportunities that we have right now to think about the situation of women in work is the pandemic has really shown that there is a feasible pathway that we can get more women into the labor force, and that the solutions, the policy solutions to do that, are not that monumental. They're not that complicated. And so, if we do want to reverse this trend, and we do want to continue to try to get more women, especially small children, into the labor force, essentially what we could do and the policies that we could focus on would be around this idea of flexible work and, remote work and those type of policy solutions. So the answer is right in front of us. We've just had this really interesting natural experiment, to show us that it is possible. Now it just relies on the efforts and the interests of business leaders to take it upon themselves to reverse some of the trends we're seeing today.
Misty Heggeness, economist and associate professor at University of Kansas. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insights. We really appreciate your analysis, and please come back anytime.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.